There's a particular kind of silence that exists in a military barracks overseas. It's not peaceful, it's loaded, heavy with the weight of distance, of time zones that separate you from everything you know, from everyone you love. On that Tuesday night in March, I was sitting in that exact silence, 8,000 miles from Texas, when my phone buzzed with a number I recognized immediately. Bill Peterson, my neighbor for the last 6 years. A good man, the kind who waves from his porch, who watches your property when you're gone, who brings over his famous brisket on the 4th of July. Bill had never called me during a deployment, not once. So when I saw his name on my screen at 11:47 p.m. my time, my stomach dropped before I even answered. "Bill?" I said, pressing the phone tight against my ear, trying to block out the sounds of the bass around me. "Eli," his voice came through, and I could hear something in it, something wrong. "Son, I don't know how to tell you this, but you need to know what's happening at your place." I stood up from my bunk, my heart already racing. 1,000 scenarios flooded my mind. Fire, flood, break-in, but nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared me for what Bill said next. "There's a family living in your house." I laughed. I actually laughed because surely I'd misheard him. The connection wasn't always great, and maybe he'd said something else entirely. "Bill, what? Say that again." "There's a family living in your house, Eli. Kids in the yard, 2 cars in the driveway. They changed your locks. They're living there like it's theirs." The world seemed to tilt sideways. I sat back down heavily on my bunk, my free hand gripping the metal frame. "That's impossible," I said. Even as the words left my mouth, I knew Bill wouldn't call me with a joke. "Bill, I need you to explain this to me slowly. What do you mean there's a family in my house?" And so he told me. He'd noticed activity about 2 weeks prior. A moving truck, people carrying furniture, children's toys appearing in my yard. At first, he thought maybe I'd rented the place out, made some arrangement I hadn't mentioned. But something felt off, so he walked over to introduce himself, to ask if they needed anything, to be neighborly.
The man who answered my door, the one I'd painted hunter green myself 3 summers ago, introduced himself as Mark. Mark and his family had just moved in. When Bill mentioned that he was my neighbor, that he knew me, Mark seemed confused. He said the HOA had told him the property was unattended, that it was being made available through some community program, that they had every right to be there. The HOA, the Westfield Meadow Homeowners Association. Let me tell you about the Westfield Meadow HOA. It's run by a woman named Karen Pritchard, and yes, I know how that sounds, but that's genuinely her name. Karen took over as president about 8 months before my deployment. She ran on a platform of community enhancement and neighborhood protection. She sent out newsletters with stock photos of smiling families. She organized 4th of July barbecues and Christmas light competitions. And apparently, while I was overseas serving my country, she decided that my home, my property that I paid for with my own money, that held my mother's antique clock and my grandfather's rifle and every memory I had of building a life, was unattended property that could be better utilized for the community's benefit. Bill had confronted Mark about it, and Mark showed him paperwork, official-looking documents with the HOA letterhead, signatures, terms and conditions, a lease agreement. Mark insisted everything was legitimate, that the HOA had paid a deposit, that the HOA had full authority to make this arrangement. When Bill pressed harder, when he said he was going to call me, Mark got defensive. He said his family needed this place, that they had nowhere else to go, that the HOA president herself had arranged it, that if Bill had a problem, he could take it up with the board. I called the sheriff's office from overseas. I explained the situation to 3 different people, each one more apologetic than the last, but the answer was always the same. I needed to be physically present. I needed to file a report in person. I needed to be there to initiate an eviction process. From 8,000 miles away, with 2 months left on my deployment, there was nothing I could do. Nothing except wait and think and plan.
last 2 months of deployment were the longest of my life. And I've been in combat situations. I've been pinned down under fire. I've gone 72 hours without sleep on missions I can't talk about. But nothing compared to the unique torture of knowing that strangers were sleeping in my bed, eating at my table, living in the space I'd built for myself while I was powerless to stop it. I contacted a lawyer through email. She reviewed what little information I had and confirmed what I already suspected. What the HOA had done was illegal. Wildly, flagrantly illegal. But she also confirmed what the sheriff had said. I needed to be home to take action. Documentation would help, but presence was essential. I asked Bill to take photos. He did, discreetly, when he could. He'd send them to me, and I'd open them on my phone in the middle of the night, staring at images of my home transformed. A child's bicycle leaning against my porch. Different curtains in my windows. A trampoline in my backyard, where I used to sit in the evenings with a beer, watching the sun set over the pecan trees. You build a life slowly, you know? You don't realize you're doing it at the time. You buy a house because the mortgage is reasonable and the land is good. You hang your grandfather's rifle over the mantel because it feels right, because it connects you to something larger than yourself. You place your mother's clock on the shelf because every time it chimes, you remember Sunday dinners and her laugh. You paint the front door green because your mom always said green doors were welcoming. You plant pecan trees because you like the idea of shade that will outlast you. You build a back deck yourself, spending weekends measuring and cutting and hammering because you want to know that your hands created something permanent. And then you leave. Because your country calls, because you took an oath, because service means something to you. And you trust that when you come back, it'll all be there, waiting, yours. I didn't sleep much those last 2 months. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw strangers walking through my house. I imagined them opening my closets, using my things, sitting in my chairs. I thought about the HOA board meeting where they made this decision, because they must have met, must have discussed it, must have voted. I wondered how many hands went up, how many people thought it was acceptable to just give away someone's home. My deployment ended. I didn't go home to ticker tape or welcome signs. I landed in Houston on a Thursday morning, picked up my truck from long-term parking, and drove straight to meet 3 of my closest friends. Jake, Marcus, and Tommy. Men I'd served with. Men who understood what it meant to have your six. Men who didn't ask questions when I called and said I needed them. We met at a diner off Highway 290. I bought them breakfast, eggs, bacon, coffee that could strip paint, and I told them the whole story. I showed them the photos Bill had sent. I showed them the emails from my lawyer. I explained what I was about to do. I need witnesses, I said. I need people there who can verify what happens. I need you to be calm and quiet and ready. This might go smoothly or it might not. Either way, I need you. Jake, who'd been my spotter on more missions than I could count, just nodded. When? Tomorrow, before sunrise. I want to be there when they wake up. Marcus, practical as always, asked, You called the sheriff? Bill did. They know I'm coming. They'll have someone there. Tommy, the youngest of us, cracked his knuckles. And if these people don't want to leave? I looked at him directly. Then the sheriff makes them leave. We're not here to intimidate. We're not here to threaten. We're here to witness and support. We do this right, by the book, legal and proper. Clear? They all nodded. We finished our breakfast, we went over the plan twice more, and then we waited. We left while stars were still visible in the sky. 4 trucks in a convoy, headlights cutting through the pre-dawn darkness, heading toward my property, toward my home. The drive took 40 minutes, and I spent every one of them gripping the steering wheel, my jaw clenched, running through scenarios in my head. What would I say? How would I stay calm? What if they refused to leave?
What if they had children who were sleeping, innocent in all this? What if they fought back? The sun was just starting to paint the eastern sky pink when we turned onto my road, Meadowbrook Lane. I'd driven this road 1,000 times, knew every curve, every pothole, every landmark. But this morning, it felt different, foreign, like I was approaching enemy territory. And then I saw it, my house. From a distance, it looked almost normal. The same structure, the same roofline, the same trees I'd planted. But as we got closer, the differences became clear, glaring, painful differences. There were toys scattered in the front yard, a plastic playhouse, a sandbox, a scooter lying on its side. The curtains were different, bright blue instead of the simple beige I'd left. There was a minivan in the driveway, a newer model with a child's car seat visible through the back window. And there, strung between my 2 pecan trees, was a hammock, a brightly colored hammock swaying slightly in the morning breeze as if mocking me. We parked across the street. The 4 of us sat there for a moment in silence, the truck's engines ticking as they cooled. The neighborhood was quiet, that particular quiet of suburbia before people wake up, before dogs bark and children shout and lawnmowers roar to life. "Remember," I said, not looking at them, my eyes fixed on my house, "we're calm, we're professional, we let the law do its work." "Copy that," Jake said quietly. We got out. Our boots on the pavement sounded too loud in the stillness. We walked up my driveway, past the minivan, past the toys, up the front steps to my door. My green door that I'd painted because Mom said green doors were welcoming. I raised my hand. I knocked. Moment, nothing happened. I knocked again, louder this time. I heard movement inside, footsteps, muffled voices, the sound of someone trying to be quiet and failing. Then the lock turned, my lock that they'd changed, and the door opened. A man stood there, mid-30s, hair messy from sleep, wearing pajama pants and my flannel shirt. My old red flannel that I'd left hanging in the closet, the one I'd worn camping, the one with the small burn mark on the sleeve from a campfire. He was wearing my shirt. "Can I help you?" he said, voice cautious, eyes moving from me to my friends standing behind me. "My name is Eli Cortez," I said, keeping my voice level. "This is my house. I'm the owner. I need you to step aside." His face went through a series of expressions: confusion, realization, defensiveness. Look, I don't know what you think is happening here, but we have a lease, the HOA. The HOA, I interrupted, had no authority to lease my property. You're trespassing. Now, I understand you may have been misled, and we can sort that out, but right now I need you to enter my home. He didn't move. "Look, man, I've got a family in here. Kids. You can't just show up and—" "Mark." I said his name, the name Bill had told me. "That's your name, right, Mark?" He nodded slowly, warily. "Mark, I just spent 7 months deployed overseas. I served my country while someone back here decided they could give away my house like it was a charity case. I don't know what you were told, I don't know what papers you signed, but this is my property, and you need to step aside. Now." Something in my voice, maybe the exhaustion, maybe the barely controlled fury, maybe just the absolute certainty made him step back. Not far, but enough. I moved forward and my friends followed, and suddenly we were inside. Inside my house that wasn't my house anymore. The furniture was wrong. The couch wasn't mine. It was newer, cheaper, positioned differently. The TV was different. There were photos on the walls, their photos, their family, their memories in the space where mine should have been. The air smelled wrong, unfamiliar cooking, different detergent, the lingering scent of someone else's life.
I walked through the living room like I was in a dream. A woman appeared from the hallway, Mark's wife, I assumed, with 2 children peering around her legs, eyes wide and frightened. She clutched a bathrobe around herself, her face pale. "Mark, what's happening?" she whispered. "He says this is his house, but we have a lease. We have paperwork." Karen said, "Where's my mother's clock?" I interrupted, looking at the mantel, looking at the empty space where her antique clock should have been, the one that chimed on the hour, the one she'd left me when she passed. What? Mark looked confused. "My mother's clock. It was on this mantel. Where is it?" His wife spoke up, hesitant. "There was an old clock when we moved in. Karen said it was being stored, that the HOA was keeping the previous owner's things in a storage unit." "Previous owner," I repeated, and I heard Jake shift behind me, heard him mutter something under his breath. "I'm not the previous owner. I am the current owner. I am the owner, and someone took my mother's clock and put it in storage without my permission." I moved past them, down the hallway toward the bedrooms. Their bedroom was my master bedroom, their bed where mine should be. I didn't go in. Instead, I went to what used to be my office and found it converted into a child's room with a small bed and toys and posters of cartoon characters. I went back to the living room, looked around more carefully, and then I saw it, behind the couch, partially hidden, pushed against the wall like an afterthought. My grandfather's rifle case. I moved the couch, their couch, aside and pulled out the case, opened it. The rifle was still there, thank God, but it was laying wrong, the care I'd always given it obviously absent. The case was dusty, forgotten, shoved aside to make room for their furniture, their life, their occupation of my space. "Who authorized you to move this?" I asked, holding up the case. "Who told you that you could take someone's belongings and just shuffle them around like unwanted furniture?" "We were told the house came partially furnished," Mark said, and now his voice was rising too, defensiveness turning to anger. "We were told this was all part of the arrangement. We signed papers. We paid a deposit. We have legal documentation that says—" "You have fraudulent documentation," I cut him off. "Documentation that means nothing because the people who gave it to you had zero authority to do so." Tommy had moved to the window, keeping watch. Marcus stood near the door. Jake was beside me, silent and solid, a presence that said everything without words. "Jake," I said quietly, "call the sheriff. Tell them we're at the property and we need an officer here now." Mark's wife made a small sound, something between a gasp and a sob. The children, a boy and a girl, maybe 7 and 5, looked terrified. And I felt something crack in my anger just a little, because they were kids. They were innocent in this. They didn't choose to be here, didn't understand what was happening, didn't deserve to be frightened. "Ma'am," I said to her, gentler than I'd spoken before, "I know this is frightening. I know you probably thought everything was legitimate, but this is my home. I never gave anyone permission to be here. Your husband was lied to, you were lied to, but that doesn't change the fact that you're trespassing." "We have nowhere else to go," she whispered. "We gave up our apartment. We paid first and last month's rent. Karen said—" "Karen lied," I said flatly. "And you're not the first people she's done this to, and you won't be the last if we don't stop her." He looked at her and saw genuine terror, saw a mother who thought she'd found a solution, a home for her family, and was now learning she'd been scammed, saw kids who were scared and confused and about to be displaced. And I felt anger, but not at them, at Karen, at the board, at the system that had allowed this to happen. "Sheriff," I said slowly, "if they need time to find a place, to get their things together properly, I'm not trying to put children on the street." Reeves nodded, understanding. "How long, Eli?" I thought about it, thought about mercy and justice, And what was right? 72 hours. 3 days. But I want an inventory of my belongings. I want to know where everything is, and I want access to my property to retrieve my personal items today. Mark looked at me, something between gratitude and resentment on his face. You'd do that? I'd do that. Because you were lied to, and your kids don't deserve to suffer for adult mistakes. But let me be crystal clear. In 3 days, you're out. And if anything of mine is missing or damaged, if anything has been sold or disposed of, you'll be hearing from my lawyer. Reeves pulled out a notebook, started making notes. I'm going to document everything here. Mr. and Mrs. I didn't get your last names? Henderson, Mark said quietly. Mark and Sarah Henderson. Mr. and Mrs. Henderson, I'm not arresting you today because I believe you were victims of fraud, but you need to cooperate fully. You need to provide any and all documentation you received from the HOA. You need to be available for questioning. Do you understand? They both nodded, Sarah still crying quietly. Reeves turned to me. Eli, do you want to press charges?
No. Against Karen Pritchard and anyone else on that board who signed off on this? Absolutely. I want every single person who had a hand in this held accountable. Reeves nodded. We're building a case. Your situation is the third one we've documented. There may be more. Third? I felt cold. She's done this to 3 families? That we know of. The investigation is ongoing. Jake spoke up for the first time. What was the scheme? What was she getting out of this? Reeves glanced at the Hendersons, then back at us. From what we can tell, she was collecting deposits and rent payments, telling families these were legitimate HOA-managed rental properties. The money went into accounts she controlled. The homeowners, the actual owners, were either deployed military, like Eli, or traveling for work or temporarily relocated. She'd target houses that looked unattended, declare them available for community use, and pocket the money. How much money? Marcus asked. Rough estimate? Over $150,000, possibly more. The number hung in the air like a bomb. Sarah Henderson made a choking sound. We paid her $3,000. First month, last month, and a deposit. We used our savings, our entire savings. You'll need to file a report, Reeves said gently. You may be able to recover some of it if we can freeze her assets, but I won't lie to you. That money is probably gone. She's likely spent it or hidden it. The next hour was spent documenting everything. Reeves took photos of the property, of the fraudulent lease, of my grandfather's rifle case shoved behind the couch. He noted the missing items I identified, my mother's clock, some books, tools from the garage, personal papers I'd left in the office. Sarah Henderson, to her credit, cooperated fully. She showed us where they'd been told to put things, what had been there when they moved in, what the HOA had told them to do. She produced text messages from Karen, emails with instructions, receipts for the money they'd paid. Mark remained sullen but compliant, clearly realizing the depth of the situation he was in.
Promising to be back in 72 hours to ensure the Hendersons vacated, I stood in my living room, and felt nothing like victory. I felt exhausted, violated, angry at a system that had allowed this to happen. Jake clapped a hand on my shoulder. You need us to stay? I shook my head. No, I'm going to get my personal items, the things that matter, and take them somewhere safe. Then I'm getting a hotel room and sleeping for about 15 hours. You sure? Tommy asked. We can help. I'm sure. Thank you, all of you. I couldn't have done this without you. They left, one by one, with promises to check in, to be available if I needed anything. And then it was just me and the Hendersons, standing in uncomfortable silence in a house full of their things and my ghosts. Mr. Cortez, Sarah said finally, I'm sorry. We didn't know. If we'd known. I believe you. I said, and I meant it. But I need you to understand something. This house, it's not just property to me. My grandfather's rifle hung over that mantel because he taught me to shoot when I was 10. My mother's clock sat on that shelf because every hour, when it chimed, I could remember her. The deck out back, I built that with my own hands over 3 summers. The trees in the yard, I planted those. I looked at her directly. When someone takes that from you, when someone just gives it away like it means nothing, like you mean nothing because you're not there to defend it, it breaks something. It breaks trust. It breaks the idea that your home is safe, that your community has your back. She was crying again, and one of the children, the little girl, was holding her mother's leg, looking up at me with huge eyes. I'm giving you 3 days because I know what it's like to have nowhere to go. I've been there. But on day 4, I'm home. And this, I gestured around the room, all of this goes back to being mine. Understood? She nodded. Mark nodded. I gathered what I could. My grandfather's rifle, some photographs I found in a box in the garage, my military medals that had been shoved in a drawer. I took my mother's dishes that I found in the kitchen cabinet, wrapped them carefully in towels. I took my flag, the one that had covered my father's casket, that I found folded carelessly in a closet. Hotel room and watched as my case became the center of a much larger investigation. Reeves called me twice a day with updates. The media got wind of it. Local HOA president accused of fraud was the headline in the county paper. Then regional news picked it up. Then state news. Other victims came forward, not just 3 houses, 7 houses total. 7 families who thought they'd found homes through some community program, who'd paid Karen Pritchard money, who'd signed leases that meant nothing. And 7 homeowners who'd been overseas or out of state, who'd trusted their community to watch their property, who'd come back to find strangers living in their spaces. The forensic accountants found that Karen had created a shell company, Westfield Community Resources, LLC, that she'd used to process the payments. She'd forged signatures of other board members, created fake meeting minutes that approved these community housing initiatives, and manufactured documentation that made it all look official. She'd been running this scheme for almost 2 years. The reason it had gone undetected was simple. She'd targeted people who were temporarily away, military deployments, long-term work assignments, extended family emergencies, people who weren't there to check their mail, to notice the changes, to object in real time. By the time they returned, the families were already moved in, already established, already sympathetic figures. And Karen had counted on that, had counted on homeowners being reluctant to evict families with children, being willing to negotiate, being too tired or too overwhelmed to push for full legal consequences. She'd miscalculated with me. 4th, exactly 72 hours after I'd knocked on my own door to find strangers inside, I returned to my house with Reeves. The Hendersons had moved out during the night, leaving the house empty but for my original furniture that they'd found in the garage and dragged back inside, plus a note apologizing and providing their new address. The house was a mess, but it was my mess now. Reeves and I walked through room by room. "We're serving warrants today," he told me. "Karen and 2 other board members who we can prove were involved. The rest of the board claims ignorance, and we haven't found evidence they knew." "You believe them?" I asked. He shrugged. "Honestly, I think they were willfully ignorant. I think they didn't want to know, didn't ask questions, signed papers because Karen told them to. But proving they knew it was fraud, that's harder." We were standing in my living room when his radio crackled. A voice announced that the warrants were being executed. "Want to ride along?" he asked. I thought about it. Thought about seeing Karen Pritchard in handcuffs, about watching her face when she realized it was over. Thought about the satisfaction of that moment. "No," I said finally. "I want to clean my house." He understood. Nodded. "I'll call you when it's done." He left, and I was finally, truly alone in my home for the first time in months. I stood in the center of the living room, listening to the silence, and it felt different now. Not peaceful, not yet, but mine. I started with the bedroom, stripping the sheets that the Hendersons had used, opening windows to air out the smell of other people's lives. I went through closets, checking what was mine and what they'd left behind. I found some of my clothes in boxes in the garage, still neatly folded from what I'd stored them before deployment.
Reclamation. I scrubbed floors. I repainted the front door, the same green, the welcoming green my mother had loved. I hung my grandfather's rifle back over the mantel where it belonged, treating it with the care and respect it deserved. I retrieved my mother's clock from the storage unit where the Hendersons had directed me. Karen had been charging the HOA for the unit, of course, pocketing that money too. When I wound the clock and set it, when I hung it back on the shelf and heard it chime for the first time in months, I felt something release in my chest. Not forgiveness, not healing, not yet, but acknowledgement. This was my space again. Bill came over in the afternoon, saw me through the window and knocked. I let him in, and he looked around with relief visible on his face. "It's good to see you home, son," he said. "It's good to be home," I replied, and meant it. He'd brought beer. We sat on my back deck, the one I'd built myself, and drank in comfortable silence for a while. "Reeves called me," Bill said eventually. "Said they got her." I nodded. I'd gotten the call too. Karen Pritchard arrested at her own home with news cameras rolling, taken into custody along with 2 board members who'd helped her forge documents and create fake approvals. Charges including fraud, forgery, grand theft, and a handful of others that the district attorney was still compiling. "How do you feel?" Bill asked. I considered the question. "Angry," I said honestly. "Violated. Like I can't trust the world the same way I did before. But also," I paused, looking out at the pecan trees, at the land I'd chosen, at the home I'd built. "Also relieved, because it's over. Because she can't do this to anyone else." I took a long drink of my beer. "But Bill, I keep thinking about the Hendersons, about those kids. They lost everything because Karen lied to them. Their savings, their home, their sense of security. They're victims too." Bill nodded slowly. "Heard they moved in with Sarah's parents, over in Killeen. It's crowded, but they have a roof." "Good," I said, and I meant it. "That's good." We sat in silence for a while longer, watching the sun start its descent toward the horizon. The kind of sunset I'd pictured when I was overseas. The kind that reminded me why I'd served, what I'd been protecting. Home, community, the idea that people could build something and trust it would be there when they returned. "You know what the worst part is?" I said finally. "It's not even the money or the inconvenience or the violation of my space. It's that she made me doubt everything. Every time I deploy now, every time I have to leave, I'll wonder if my house will still be mine when I get back. Every time I see an HOA notice, I'll question whether it's legitimate. Every time I meet a neighbor, I'll wonder if they'd stand up for me or if they'd just watch it happen." "Most people would stand up," Bill said quietly. "I did. I agreed, and I'm grateful for that. But Karen was in a position of trust. She was elected. People believed in her, and she used that trust to steal from the very people she was supposed to protect." I shook my head. "How do you come back from knowing that's possible?" Bill didn't have an answer for that. Neither did I. What followed were a blur of legal proceedings. I gave my statement to the district attorney's office 3 times, each one more detailed than the last. They wanted dates, times, documentation, evidence. They wanted to know every interaction I'd had with the HOA, every email I'd sent, every payment I'd made. I provided everything. Months of HOA dues, paid on time, correspondence about minor issues, a fence that needed repair, a question about trash pickup schedules.
Nothing that indicated any problem, any conflict, anything that would justify what they'd done. The DA assigned to the case was a woman named Patricia Morales, sharp, mid-40s with a reputation for not backing down. She met with me in her office, a cramped space overflowing with case files and legal texts. "Mr. Cortez," she said, shaking my hand firmly, "I want you to know we're taking this very seriously. What happened to you, what happened to all 7 homeowners, this isn't just fraud. This is a violation of trust that goes to the heart of community safety." "What are the charges?" I asked. She ticked them off on her fingers. For Karen Pritchard, 7 counts of fraud, 7 counts of forgery, 7 counts of grand theft, conspiracy, and misuse of authority. For the 2 board members who helped, Daniel Royce and Michelle Chen, conspiracy, accessory to fraud, and forgery. We're also looking at potential civil charges, RICO violations, and we're coordinating with the IRS because she definitely didn't pay taxes on this income. "Good," I said simply. Patricia leaned back in her chair. "I need to prepare you for something, though. Karen's attorney is going to try to paint her as overwhelmed, as someone who made bad decisions under stress, as someone who was trying to help the community. They'll point to the families she housed, say she was solving a housing crisis, that her intentions were good even if her methods were flawed." "Her intentions?" I repeated slowly, feeling anger rise in my chest, "were to steal money from people who couldn't defend themselves. She targeted deployed military members. She forged documents. She lied to families and took their life savings. There's no good intention in that." "I agree," said Patricia, "but I need you to be ready for it. And I need you to be ready for the fact that some people in the community might actually sympathize with her. Some people might think that housing families is more important than property rights. It's wrong, but it's how some people will see it."
I was right. The local Facebook groups exploded with debate. Half the community was outraged on behalf of the homeowners, military members, and others who'd been robbed. The other half focused on the families, on the children who'd been displaced, on the housing crisis that Karen had supposedly been addressing. I made the mistake of reading the comments one night, scrolling through hundreds of opinions from people who didn't know me, didn't understand what it felt like to come home to strangers in your house. Maybe if he'd rented it out properly instead of leaving it empty. Those families needed somewhere to live. Where's the compassion? The HOA was just trying to use community resources efficiently. This is what happens when you let the government, or HOAs, have too much power. I wanted to respond. I wanted to tell them that my house wasn't empty. It was waiting for me, that I'd paid someone to maintain the yard, to check on things, to ensure it was secure. That leaving for military deployment wasn't abandoning property, it was serving my country, with the expectation that my community would respect what I'd built. I wanted to tell them that compassion for the families didn't erase the crime committed against me, that Karen could have actually helped people through legitimate means, through real community programs, through actual charity work, instead of stealing and lying. But Bill, wise as always, told me to stay off social media. "Let your lawyer do the talking," he said. "Let the courts handle it. You respond to that stuff, you just give them more to twist around." He was right, but it stung. Seeing my service questioned, seeing my rights dismissed, seeing people I'd lived near for years debate whether what happened to me even mattered. On a cold morning in November, I wore my dress uniform, Patricia's suggestion. "Remind them who you are," she'd said. "Remind them what you sacrificed." The courthouse was packed. Media, community members, the other victims, the families who'd been displaced, everyone wanted to see how this would play out. I sat in the front row, flanked by Jake and Marcus, both also in uniform, a silent statement of solidarity. Karen Pritchard entered in a conservative gray suit, her hair pulled back, looking nothing like the confident HOA president from the newsletters. She looked smaller somehow, older. Her attorney, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit, whispered to her constantly. The prosecution laid out their case methodically.
document after document showing the forgeries, bank statements showing the money flow, testimony from the other homeowners, each one describing the shock of discovery, the violation of trust, the financial and emotional impact. When it was my turn to testify, I walked to the stand with my heart pounding, placed my hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, and then sat facing the courtroom full of people. Patricia led me through my story, where I'd been deployed, when I'd gotten the call from Bill, what I'd found when I returned, how it had felt to see strangers living in my home, wearing my clothes, sleeping in my bed. "Can you describe for the court what your mother's clock meant to you?" she asked. I took a breath. My mother passed away 6 years ago. Cancer. That clock was one of the few things I had left of her. It was a family heirloom, her grandmother's originally. Every hour when it chimed, it was like hearing her voice again. When I found out it had been taken from my home, put in storage like it was junk to be cleared out, my voice caught. It felt like losing her all over again. Karen's attorney tried to rattle me during cross-examination. "Mr. Cortez, isn't it true that your house sat empty for 7 months?" "My house sat secure and maintained while I was deployed serving my country," I corrected. "But you weren't using it. It was functionally unused space." "It was my home. I was coming back to it. That's not unused. That's waiting." "And you're aware that there's a housing shortage in this county, that families struggle to find affordable places to live?" "I'm aware. I'm also aware that stealing someone's property isn't the solution to that problem. If Miss Pritchard wanted to help families, she could have started a legitimate program. She could have worked with actual vacant properties. She could have fundraised, partnered with charities, done any number of legal things. Instead, she committed fraud. She made a mistake. She committed multiple felonies over the course of 2 years. That's not a mistake. That's a pattern. That's a choice." But the most powerful testimony came from the other victims. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen, who'd been on a Navy deployment when her house was taken. She'd returned to find a family of 6 living there, her home office converted into bedrooms, her deceased husband's Marine Corps memorabilia packed away in the garage. Marcus Thompson, a contractor who'd been working a year-long project in Alaska. His house had been given to someone the HOA president described as a community volunteer, who'd proceeded to adopt 3 large dogs that destroyed the hardwood floors Marcus had installed himself. The Johnsons, an elderly couple who'd been caring for their son through cancer treatment in Houston for 8 months. They'd returned to find their home occupied, their gardens destroyed, their lifetime of memories dismissed as clutter that had been donated. Each one told their story. Each one described the shock, the violation, the sense that nothing was safe anymore. Each one had trusted their community, trusted the HOA, trusted that their property would be protected. And then Sarah Henderson testified for the prosecution. Mark and Sarah, the family who'd been living in my house, who'd lost their savings to Karen's scheme. Sarah sat in the witness box, hands clasped tightly, voice shaking as she described how Karen had approached them, how she'd seemed so legitimate, so official, how the paperwork had looked real, how they'd believed they'd finally found a stable home for their children. "We gave her everything," Sarah said, crying openly now. "Our savings, our security deposit from our apartment, we trusted her. And then Officer Daniels showed up and told us it was all fake, that we'd lost everything, that we'd been living in someone else's home without even knowing it." Karen's attorney tried to use this testimony to paint his client as someone who'd been trying to help, whose good intentions had gone wrong, but Patricia demolished that in redirect. "Miss Henderson, did Karen Pritchard ever tell you that the homeowner was deployed military?" "No." "Did she ever tell you that the homeowner hadn't given permission?" "No." "Did she ever mention that the signatures on the documents were forged?" "No." "So she lied to you. She took your money under false pretenses. She made you an unwitting participant in a crime. Is that correct?" "Yes." Sarah whispered. Corinne's defense was exactly what Patricia had predicted. Her attorney painted her as an overwhelmed community leader who'd been trying to solve a real problem, housing insecurity, through unconventional means. He brought in witnesses who testified to her years of community service, her volunteer work, her dedication to the neighborhood. He tried to argue that she genuinely believed the HOA had authority to manage abandoned properties, that she'd been operating under a misunderstanding of property law, not criminal intent. He brought in a housing advocate who testified about the crisis facing families, about the lack of affordable rentals, about the difficulty of finding stable homes, as if that justified theft. I watched Corinne throughout the trial, trying to understand how someone makes that choice, how you look at another person's home and decide it's yours to give away, how you forge signatures and lie to families and sleep at night knowing you're destroying people's sense of security. She never looked at me, not once, not during my testimony, not during the breaks, not when we passed in the hallway. She looked down, or at her attorney, or at her hands, but never at the people she'd victimized. On the fourth day of trial, the prosecution rested, the defense rested, and the jury went to deliberate. They were out for 6 hours. 6 hours of sitting in the courthouse hallway, drinking bad coffee, checking my phone constantly, trying not to think about what it would mean if she was acquitted. If a jury looked at all that evidence and decided it wasn't enough. If they decided that housing families mattered more than property rights, more than forgery, more than fraud. Patricia came out twice to update us. The first time, they requested clarification on the forgery charges. That's good, means they're taking it seriously. The second time, they requested to see the financial documents again. Also good, they're following the money. And then, finally, the bailiff came out. Jury's back. We filed into the courtroom. Karen and her attorney at their table, the other victims scattered through the gallery. The jury filing in, faces serious and unreadable. The judge entered. We rose, we sat, the formalities of justice, each one feeling like it took forever. Has the jury reached a verdict? We have, Your Honor. The forewoman stood, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes who'd listened intently throughout the trial. On the count of fraud in the first degree, how do you find the defendant? Guilty. I felt something break open in my chest. Beside me, Jake squeezed my shoulder. Marcus let out a breath he'd been holding. On the count of forgery, guilty. On the count of grand theft, guilty. 7 counts, 7 guilty verdicts for each crime. Fraud, forgery, theft, conspiracy. Each one hitting like a hammer. Each one a validation that what happened to us mattered, that the law recognized the violation, that justice existed even when it felt impossible. Karen Critchard sat frozen, her face pale, her attorney's hand on her arm. She never looked at the jury, never looked at us. Even at the moment of reckoning, she couldn't face what she'd done. The accomplices, Daniel Royce and Michelle Chen, were found guilty on most counts as well. Lesser charges, lesser sentences coming, but guilty nonetheless. Sentencing came 3 weeks later. The courtroom was just as packed, everyone wanting to see the final chapter. The judge, Judge Martin Rivera, a former prosecutor with a reputation for fairness but no tolerance for corruption, reviewed the case carefully before pronouncing sentence. Ms. Pritchard, he said, and Karen stood on shaking legs. This court has seen many cases of fraud, of theft, of betrayal of trust. But the systematic nature of your crimes, the calculated way you targeted vulnerable homeowners, the callous disregard you showed for both the property owners and the families you manipulated, this rises to a level that demands serious consequences. You held a position of trust. You were elected by your community to protect their interests, to manage their collective concerns, to serve as a steward of their neighborhood. Instead, you used that position to enrich yourself. You forged documents. You lied to families in need. You stole from military members who were serving their country. You created victims on both sides of your scheme, leaving a trail of financial and emotional devastation. He paused, letting the words sink in. For the crime of fraud in the first degree, 7 counts, 15 years on each count to run concurrently. For forgery, 10 years concurrent. For grand theft, 10 years concurrent. For conspiracy, 5 years concurrent. Total sentence, 15 years in state prison with the possibility of parole after serving 85% of the sentence. Karen Pritchard collapsed into her chair. 15 years. She'd be almost 70 when she got out. Daniel Royce received 7 years. Michelle Chen, who cooperated more fully with prosecutors, received 5 years, with the possibility of early release for good behavior. The judge also ordered restitution, every penny Karen had taken, plus damages, plus interest. It wouldn't cover everything. Her assets weren't nearly enough, but it was something.
The Westfield Meadow HOA was dissolved. The remaining board members resigned. The neighborhood voted to operate without an HOA for the foreseeable future. Everyone too raw from the betrayal to trust that structure again. I threw myself into restoring my home. Not just physically, though I did that too, repainting every room, refinishing floors, making it mine again. But spiritually, emotionally. I hosted dinners for Bill and his wife. I invited Jake, Marcus, and Tommy over for barbecues. I slowly filled the space with new memories, good memories, memories that could coexist with the violation. I retrieved all my belongings from the storage unit, set up my mother's clock exactly where it had always been, hung my grandfather's rifle with the proper care and respect, framed my father's flag and mounted it in my office, where I could see it every day. 3 months after the trial, I ran into Sarah Henderson at the grocery store. She froze when she saw me, her face going white, her hand tightening on her shopping cart. "Mr. Cortez?" she said quietly. "Mrs. Henderson," I replied. We stood there awkwardly for a moment. Then she spoke, words rushing out. "I need you to know, we testified for the prosecution. We told them everything. We helped however we could, and I'm so sorry for what happened. We truly didn't know. We never would have—" I held up a hand, stopping her. "I know. I believe you. You were victims too. How are you and your family doing?" She blinked, surprised by the question. We're managing. We're with my parents still. It's crowded. Mark's working 2 jobs to rebuild our savings, but we're okay. We're going to be okay." "Good," I said, and I meant it. "I'm glad. What happened to you wasn't fair either. I hope you get back on your feet soon." Tears filled her eyes. "Thank you. That means thank you." We parted ways, and I realized something important. Holding on to anger at the Hendersons wouldn't serve anyone. They'd been manipulated, used as pawns in Karen's scheme. The real villain had been caught, tried, and sentenced. The rest was just collateral damage that needed healing. Sometimes if I regret pressing charges, if I think 15 years was too harsh, if I feel bad about what happened to Karen or to Daniel and Michelle. The answer is no. What Karen did wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment or a well-intentioned plan gone wrong. It was a systematic, calculated crime spree that lasted 2 years. She had countless opportunities to stop, to come clean, to make things right. She never did. She only stopped because she got caught. 7 families lost their sense of home. 7 families came back from deployment, from work, from caring for sick loved ones to find strangers in their houses. 7 families had to fight to reclaim what was theirs. And at least 7 other families, probably more, lost their savings and their housing because they believed Karen's lies. The case exposed something bigger than one corrupt HOA president. It exposed how vulnerable we are when we leave our homes, how much we depend on community trust, how easily someone with just enough power and official-looking paperwork can upend lives. It also exposed gaps in the law.
No system was in place to flag when HOAs were making unauthorized decisions about private property. No oversight existed to catch forgeries before families moved in. No protections existed specifically for deployed military members' properties. In the wake of the trial, Texas legislators introduced the Homeowner Protection Act, a bill that would require HOAs to verify ownership and get explicit permission before any action affecting private property. It would create a registry of deployed service members' properties and impose serious penalties for any unauthorized actions regarding them. It would require regular audits of HOA finances. As of now, it's still working through committee. Politics being what it is, I'm not holding my breath, but at least people are paying attention. At least the conversation is happening.
I installed security cameras around my property. Not because I'm paranoid, but because I've learned that trust needs to be balanced with verification. I can check on my home from anywhere in the world now. I can see who's on my property, who's at my door, what's happening in real time. I also established a formal property management agreement with Bill. If I deploy again, he has legal power of attorney for property issues. He can make decisions, take action, protect my interests. It's documented, notarized, filed with the county. No one can claim my house is unattended or abandoned when there's clear legal management in place. I joined a veterans advocacy group that educates service members about property rights and protections. We do workshops before deployments, explaining how to secure your property, what documentation to have, what scams to watch for, what legal protections exist. Because here's what I learned. Most people don't know their rights until those rights are violated. Most people trust that the system will protect them until the system fails. Most people assume that official means legitimate until they learn otherwise. Education is protection. Documentation is protection. Community, real community, not just organizational structures, is protection.
Now, my house looks like mine again, smells like mine, feels like mine. The wounds have scabbed over, though I'm not sure they've fully healed. I still wake up sometimes in the middle of the night, disoriented, needing to walk through the house and touch things, the walls, the furniture, the clock, to reassure myself that it's real, that it's mine, that no one can take it away again. I've noticed I don't leave as easily as I used to. A weekend trip requires planning, checking the cameras multiple times, asking Bill to drive by more than is probably necessary. I'm working on that, working on trusting again, but it's hard. Home is supposed to be safe. That's the fundamental promise of home, that it's your space, your sanctuary, your place in the world where you can let your guard down. When that promise is broken, when someone violates that fundamental contract, it changes you. I think about the other victims sometimes, wonder how they're doing, whether Sarah Chen has been able to sleep through the night without checking her locks, whether Marcus Thompson can look at his floors without seeing the damage, whether the Johnsons have been able to recreate their garden to make new memories that don't involve the violation. We have a group chat now, all 7 homeowners. We check in with each other, share updates, offer support when one of us is having a hard day. There's a dark solidarity in surviving the same trauma, in understanding what the others have lost.
Veteran returns home to find strangers living there is apparently a headline that resonates. I did a few interviews, always careful to emphasize that I wasn't the only victim, that the families who'd been scammed deserved sympathy too, that the real villain was the system that allowed this to happen. I heard from people across the country, other military members who'd had similar experiences, not identical but similar enough, property issues during deployment, HOA overreach, neighbors or relatives who'd taken advantage of their absence. I heard from HOA board members who were horrified, who couldn't imagine anyone in their position abusing that trust, who wanted to know how to prevent it in their communities. I heard from families who'd been scammed by rental schemes, who'd lost their savings to landlords who didn't own the properties they were renting, who understood the Hendersons' situation too well. The story became a Rorschach test of sorts. Some people saw it as proof that HOAs have too much power and need stricter oversight. Some saw it as evidence that property rights are sacred and must be fiercely protected. Some focused on the housing crisis and the need for better social support systems. Some focused on the protection of military families. All of those perspectives have validity. The truth is complex, as truth usually is. Yes, HOAs need oversight. Yes, property rights matter. Yes, we need better housing solutions. Yes, military families need special protections. All of those things can be true simultaneously. What frustrated me was the people who tried to simplify it, who said the Hendersons should have known better, or who said I should have been more forgiving, or who said Karen deserved a lighter sentence because she was helping people. Complex situations don't fit into simple narratives, no matter how much we want them to. Months after the sentencing, I got an email from Mark Henderson. It was long, rambling, clearly written and rewritten multiple times. He apologized again. He explained their situation before they'd met Karen: eviction from their apartment due to a rent increase they couldn't afford, living in their car for 2 weeks with 2 young children, the desperation that had made Karen's offer seem like a miracle. He didn't excuse what happened, didn't ask for forgiveness, just wanted me to understand the context, the vulnerability that had made them targets. I thought about responding for a week, drafted and deleted a dozen emails, finally sent one back. Mark, thank you for reaching out. I appreciate your honesty about your situation. I want you to know that I never blamed you and Sarah for what happened. You were victims of Karen's scheme just as I was, just in a different way. What happened to you, losing your savings, being made unwitting participants in a crime, wasn't fair. What happened to me, losing my home to strangers, wasn't fair either. 2 things can be true at once. We can both be victims of the same person's crimes. I hope you and your family are doing better. I hope you've been able to rebuild. I hope your kids don't remember much of this mess. Take care. Eli. He wrote back thanking me. We didn't become friends. Too much had happened for that. But we reached a kind of peace. An understanding that we'd both been caught in someone else's crime and had survived it as best we could. It felt important, that exchange, a reminder that most people in difficult situations aren't villains. They're just people who made choices with incomplete information, who were manipulated by someone more ruthless, who were trying to survive in a system that didn't give them many options. Karen was the villain, clear, unambiguous. Everyone else was just trying to navigate the wreckage she'd created. On my own door and found Mark Henderson wearing my shirt. A year of legal proceedings, media attention, emotional processing, and slow healing. My house is finally, truly mine again. I've made enough new memories here that the bad ones are starting to fade into background noise rather than consuming my every thought. I had Thanksgiving here last year. Bill and his family, Jake and Marcus and Tommy, some other veterans from the local VFW. We filled the house with laughter and food and the kind of comfortable chaos that makes a space feel lived in and loved. I planted new trees in the backyard, additions to the pecans I'd put in years ago. My father always said that planting trees was an act of faith. Faith that the future would come, that the world would still be there, that the shade would matter to someone someday. I'm choosing to have that faith again. I ran into Sarah Henderson again last month. This time, she told me they'd found a place, a small rental, nothing fancy, but it's theirs legitimately. Mark's been promoted at work, the kids are doing well in school. They're rebuilding, slowly but surely.
The other homeowners from the case are in various stages of recovery. Sarah Chen retired from the Navy and moved closer to her family. Marcus Thompson sold his house, couldn't live with the memories, and bought a place 2 counties over. The Johnsons are still in their home, but they installed a security system that would make Fort Knox jealous. We're all scarred by it, but we're surviving.
Lessons and wisdom. If there's anything I want people to take away from my story, it's this. First, document everything. Every interaction with your HOA, every payment, every agreement. Keep copies of everything in multiple places, physical and digital. If something seems wrong, if you get a notice that doesn't make sense, if someone claims authority they shouldn't have, question it immediately. Trust, but verify. Second, build real community. Not organizational community, not HOA meeting attendance community, but actual relationships with your neighbors. Bill saved me because he knew me, because he cared enough to call, because he was willing to get involved. That kind of neighbor is worth more than any bylaw or regulation. Third, understand your rights. Especially if you're military, especially if you travel for work, especially if you might need to leave your property for extended periods. Know what protections exist. Know what's legal and what isn't. Know who to call when something goes wrong. Fourth, and maybe most important, hold people accountable. I could have let this go. I could have accepted the situation, worked out a settlement, moved on quietly. A lot of people suggested I do exactly that. Don't make waves, they said. It'll be easier. But easier for who? Easier for me in the short term, maybe, but not easier for the next person Karen targeted. Not easier for the families she would have continued to scam. Not easier for the community that needed to know they had a predator in a position of trust. Justice isn't always convenient. It's often uncomfortable, time-consuming, expensive, and emotionally draining. But it matters. Accountability matters. Saying this is not okay and following through until something changes, that matters. People sometimes ask me if I wish I'd handled anything differently, if I regret how aggressive I was in pursuing charges, in cooperating with the investigation, in ensuring Karen faced the maximum consequences. The answer is no, I don't regret it. What I regret is that it was necessary. What I regret is that someone I'd never wronged, someone who was supposed to serve the community, decided that my home was hers to give away. What I regret is that 7 families lost their peace of mind because one person valued money over integrity. But given that those things happened, given that I had to make choices about how to respond, I'm satisfied with the choices I made. I fought back. I stood up, I said, this is wrong, and I didn't back down until something changed. So now I put the question to you, the people who've listened to this whole long story. Were the Hendersons victims or participants? Does intention matter when the result is still trespassing? Can 2 people both be victims of the same crime, even when they're on opposite sides of the situation? I've told you what I think. I've told you that I believe Mark and Sarah Henderson were victims of Karen's fraud, that they lost their savings and their stability because of lies they had no reason to doubt. I've told you that I don't blame them for what happened to me, even though they were the ones living in my house, using my things, occupying my space. But I also know that's complicated. I know some people think they should have asked more questions, should have insisted on meeting the actual homeowner, should have been more suspicious of a deal that seemed too good to be true. I know some people think that no matter how much they were lied to, they still chose to move into someone else's home and therefore bear some responsibility. There's no easy answer. Life rarely provides easy answers. What I know is that I'm home now. I'm safe now. The person who violated my trust and my property rights is in prison. The case changed things in our community, not just the dissolution of the HOA, though that was significant, but deeper changes.
People pay attention now. They ask questions. They don't just accept official-looking paperwork at face value. The local veterans groups have new protocols. Before any deployment, they do property protection workshops. They help service members set up legal safeguards, establish power of attorney for trusted individuals, create documentation that prevents exactly what happened to me. The county requires additional oversight for HOAs now, regular financial audits, board meeting minutes that must be published, a complaint process that goes to the county, not just to the HOA itself. It's not perfect, but it's better than it was. The real estate community talks about it at conferences. The Westfield Meadow case has become shorthand for HOA overreach, a cautionary tale told to new board members about the importance of understanding legal limits. I see it in smaller ways too. Bill tells me that neighbors actually talk to each other now. They check in. They watch out for each other's properties, not in a nosy way, but in a genuine community way. The fear that someone in authority could do something like this again has paradoxically made people more connected, more vigilant, more willing to speak up when something seems wrong. There's a new neighborhood watch that's actually about watching out for each other, not just reporting suspicious outsiders. There's a phone tree for emergencies. There's a shared document with everyone's emergency contacts and travel schedules. It's what community should have been all along. It took a crisis to get us there, but we got there.
Personal growth and healing. I've changed too. I don't think you go through something like this without changing. I'm more cautious now, more protective of my space and my belongings. I'm slower to trust official authority, quicker to verify information, more insistent on documentation. Some of that is probably healthy. Some of it might be hypervigilance that I should work on. I'm seeing a therapist, a veterans counselor who specializes in adjustment issues and trauma. We talk about the deployment, yes, but we also talk about what happened when I came home, about the violation, about rebuilding trust. She tells me that what I experienced was a form of trauma, not combat trauma, not life-threatening trauma, but trauma nonetheless. The violation of your safe space, the disruption of your sense of home, the betrayal by your community structures, those things leave marks. I still have hard days, days when I walk through my house touching things, making sure they're where they should be, days when I check the security cameras obsessively, days when I can't shake the feeling that it could all be taken away again. But I also have good days, more good days than bad now. Days when I sit on my deck with my morning coffee and feel genuinely peaceful. Days when I have friends over and laugh without that underlying current of anxiety. Days when this place feels like home again, not just a structure I'm defending. Healing isn't linear. Some days I feel like I've moved past it completely. Other days, something small, a piece of mail addressed to Westfield Meadow HOA, a news story about property fraud, seeing someone who vaguely resembles Mark Henderson in a store, sends me right back to that moment of standing on my own porch, knocking on my own door, not knowing what I'd find inside. I couldn't have gotten through this without support. Bill and his wife have been incredible. My military buddies, Jake, Marcus, Tommy, they check in regularly. They understand the kind of brotherhood that says, you call, we come, no questions asked. My family, scattered across 3 states, rallied around me. My sister flew in during the trial, sat in the courtroom every day, held my hand when the verdict was read. My brother handled some of the legal paperwork, coordinated with my lawyer, ran interference with the media. The other victims from the case, we have each other. We understand in a way no one else can. We don't talk about it all the time, but knowing they're there.
So what now? Where do I go from here? Forward. That's the only direction that makes sense. I can't undo what happened. I can't erase those 7 months of strangers living in my house. I can't get back the peace of mind I had before, when I thought that serving my country meant my community would protect what was mine. But I can build something new. I can create new memories that are stronger than the violated ones. I can use what I learned to help others. I can be the kind of neighbor to someone else that Bill was to me. I'm considering running for county commissioner. Local government, real oversight, actual accountability. The kind of position where I could push for the protections that should have existed all along. Where I could make sure that what happened to me doesn't happen to the next deployed service member, the next traveling worker, the next person who has to leave their home in the care of their community. I'm also working with a veterans advocacy group to create a national database of property protection resources, legal templates for power of attorney, checklists for pre-deployment preparation, lists of reputable property management companies, information about what's legal, what's not, and what to do if something goes wrong. If my experience can prevent even one other service member from going through what I went through, then something good will have come from it. Not that it was worth it, I'd never say that, but that something useful, something protective, something meaningful can be built from the wreckage. I'm also mentoring younger veterans in the community, guys and gals who were just starting out, buying their first homes, figuring out how to balance military service with civilian life. I tell them my story, not to scare them, but to prepare them, to teach them that vigilance isn't paranoia, that documentation isn't distrust, that protecting yourself is smart, not cynical.
Discovery, the confrontation, the investigation, the trial, the sentencing, the aftermath. I keep coming back to questions about justice. Did justice happen? Yes, in the legal sense. Karen Pritchard was tried, convicted, and sentenced. The system, however slowly, worked. The law recognized the crime and imposed consequences. But was it enough? Can any legal consequence truly address the violation of having strangers live in your home? Can any prison sentence restore the sense of security that was taken? Can any verdict undo the months of anxiety, the nights of sleeplessness, the fundamental shift in how you see the world? No. Legal justice and personal healing are related but not identical. The verdict helped. The sentence helped. Knowing that Karen can't do this to anyone else for at least the next 12 years, that helps. But it doesn't erase what happened. It doesn't make me whole the way I was before. And maybe that's okay. Maybe wholeness after trauma isn't about returning to who you were before. Maybe it's about integrating the experience, learning from it, becoming someone new who carries the scars but isn't defined by them. I'm not the same person who left for deployment believing his home would be waiting unchanged. That person is gone, and honestly, I don't think I want him back. The person I am now is more cautious, yes, but also more aware, more engaged with my community, more willing to fight for what's right, more committed to helping others navigate the complexities of property rights and legal protections. That person, this person I am now, is harder maybe, more scarred certainly, but also stronger, more resilient, more capable of handling whatever comes next.
If you're listening to this and you're military, or you travel for work, or you have to leave your home for extended periods, here's what I want you to know. Your home is not automatically safe just because you own it. Legal ownership doesn't prevent someone from trying to take it, occupy it, or claim authority over it. You need active protection, not just passive assumption of rights. Set up systems before you leave. Give someone you trust legal authority to act on your behalf, not just a friendly neighbor checking the mail, actual legal power of attorney, documented and filed. Security cameras that you can monitor remotely. Regular check-ins scheduled and logged. Know your rights. Know what your HOA can and cannot do. Know what local laws protect you. Know who to call if something goes wrong. Sheriff's office, property attorney, veterans advocacy groups if applicable. Document everything. Every interaction, every payment, every agreement. Take photos of your property before you leave. Keep copies of all important papers in multiple locations. Make it easy to prove what's yours and what's not. And if something does go wrong, if you discover that someone has violated your property, your rights, your trust, don't let it go. Don't accept that's just how it is. Don't settle for less than full accountability just because fighting back is hard. It will be hard. It will take time, energy, money, and emotional resources you didn't know you had. It will be frustrating and exhausting, and sometimes it will feel impossible. Do it anyway. Because the alternative is living with the knowledge that someone took something from you and faced no consequences. The alternative is knowing that they'll do it to someone else. The alternative is a world where property rights mean nothing, where positions of trust can be abused freely, where serving your country makes you a target instead of someone worthy of protection. Don't accept that world. Fight back. Hold people accountable. Demand justice, even when it's difficult. The Henderson family revisited. I want to come back to the Hendersons one more time, because I think their story is important and often gets lost in the larger narrative. Mark and Sarah Henderson were not villains. They were desperate parents who thought they'd found a legitimate housing solution for their family. They were lied to by someone in authority, someone with official-looking documents, someone who seemed trustworthy. Could they have asked more questions? Maybe. Should they have insisted on meeting the property owner? Possibly. But when you're living in your car with 2 young children, when you've been turned down for apartment after apartment because your credit isn't perfect or your income isn't high enough, when someone who seems official offers you a solution, you want to believe it. You need to believe it. That doesn't mean what happened was okay. It doesn't mean I wasn't harmed by their presence in my home. It doesn't mean the situation was acceptable just because they didn't know better. 2 things are true. They were victims of fraud, and I was a victim of trespassing. They lost their savings unfairly, and I lost my home's security unfairly. They deserve sympathy, and I deserved justice. The world isn't binary. People aren't simply victims or perpetrators, innocent or guilty. They're complex, making decisions with incomplete information, trying to survive in systems that don't always work in their favor. Karen Pritchard was the clear villain because she had complete information. She knew she was forging documents. She knew she was lying to homeowners and renters alike. She knew she was committing fraud. She made deliberate choices, repeatedly over 2 years, to harm people for personal gain. The Hendersons made a choice too, to trust someone they shouldn't have, to accept an offer that seemed too good to be true, to move into a home without thoroughly verifying ownership. But they made that choice from a position of desperation and incomplete information. I can acknowledge their situation was difficult while still maintaining that they shouldn't have been in my house. I can feel sympathy for what they went through while still asserting my right to my property. I can hope they've rebuilt their lives while being glad they're no longer in my space. Maturity, I think, is being able to hold all of those perspectives simultaneously. Understanding that life is complicated, that most people are doing their best with what they have, but that doesn't erase harm or eliminate the need for boundaries and consequences.
Current status. So where am I now as I tell you this story? I'm sitting on my back deck, the one I built myself. It's a Sunday afternoon in late spring. The sun is warm, but not too hot. There's a breeze moving through the pecan trees, the ones I planted years ago that are finally providing real shade. My mother's clock is chiming inside, 4 o'clock, and I can hear it through the open window. That sound still brings me peace. Bill and his wife are coming over for dinner tonight. Jake's in town next weekend and we're planning a fishing trip. Marcus called yesterday just to check in. Tommy sent me a meme about terrible HOAs that made me actually laugh out loud. My house is mine. Completely, legally, undeniably mine. The locks are changed, by me this time. The security cameras feed to my phone. Every room has been reclaimed, repainted, filled with memories that belong to me. Karen Pritchard is in year 2 of her 15-year sentence. I don't think about her much anymore. When I do, I feel mostly nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, just a distant acknowledgement that justice was served and she can't hurt anyone else. The Hendersons sent me a Christmas card last year. Their kids drew pictures. They're doing okay, rebuilding slowly. I sent one back. We're not friends, but we're not enemies. We're just two families who got caught in someone else's crime and survived it. The county's new HOA oversight regulations went into effect 6 months ago. The Homeowners Protection Act is still in committee, but there's momentum. Change is happening, slowly but surely. So I'll leave you with this final thought. Home is more than just property. It's more than 4 walls and a roof. It's the place where you're supposed to feel safe, where your memories live, where you can let your guard down and just be. When someone violates that, whether through malice or manipulation, whether intentionally or unknowingly, it leaves a mark. It changes how you see the world. It teaches you that things you thought were permanent can be taken away. But it also teaches you that you're stronger than you knew, that you can fight back, that justice, however imperfect, is worth pursuing, that community, real community, matters more than any organization or structure. So, I'll leave you with this final thought. Were the Hendersons victims or part of the problem? I've given you my answer, but ultimately you have to decide for yourself. What I know is this. Complexity is uncomfortable, but it's real. Most situations don't have clear heroes and villains. Most people are just trying to survive, making choices with the information they have. What matters is what we do with that complexity. Do we demand accountability from those with power? Do we protect those who are vulnerable? Do we create systems that prevent exploitation? Do we build communities that actually care for each other? Those are the questions that matter. As for me, I'm home. I'm healing. I'm moving forward. The sun is setting now, painting the sky pink and orange. The breeze is picking up. Bill's truck is pulling into the driveway. I'm going to fire up the grill, pour some drinks, and spend the evening with people I trust. Tomorrow, I'll wake up in my own bed, in my own house, with my own memories surrounding me. And that, after everything, feels like victory enough. Thank you for listening to my story. Stay vigilant, protect what's yours, build real community, and never let someone with just enough power convince you that your rights don't matter. This is Eli Cortez, and this is my story of coming home.